necessity is the mother of invention. Frank Zappa is the mother of invention. Bass players are born out of necessity. What's a nice guy like you playing bass?
I got incredibly fortunate because a very dear friend of mine, Keef, who's one of the greatest guitar players I've ever met and a really good friend, wanted to play instrumental guitar music along the lines of Jerry Reed, Chet Atkins, The Ventures, you know, a lot of like surf. We settled on the term surf and twang. And this is probably going back to about 2010. We were hanging out having coffee one day, and he said, you know, I've been thinking of doing this project, but I can't find the right people. And would you be interested in doing it? And at that point, I had played bass occasionally as a kind of fill-in instrument, you know, the typical thing of like, well, you play guitar, you know where the notes are, you can hold down a bass line, right? Right. In fact, that was how I first met Keef. Was we both were on a project that a friend of ours was playing live, and so I stepped in and did that part. But when Keef asked me, did I want to play with him, it was kind of like, God, do I want to play with you? I want to be good enough to feel like I'm holding my own in the band. So I learned a bunch of songs on bass, just listening to the tunes and copying the bass parts. And that, then we were off and running, and eventually we found a drummer and we formed a band called the Bakersfield Breakers, right, AKA the B Breakers. And we continue to this day playing instrumental surf and twang. It's a trio, guitar, bass, drums. And John DiGiulio is the third member, and he's an amazing drummer. And the great thing about the band is, I mean, aside from the fact that I think we play really well because we're all pretty good at this point, is we just are totally committed to making it sound good, and we're all good players, so it does. But it's funny, I was thinking about it earlier. I think that, you know, part of the reason that I feel like I'm doing well with bass at this point is because I rarely say no when somebody asks me if I want to try playing bass with them, regardless of what kind of music it is. I try and find the right niche, the right pocket for whatever's being played. And a lot of the time I'm playing with people who I feel like, you know, from the get-go are maybe better than me, or, you know, or maybe a little above my weight class. So I always work really hard to get to their weight class. So that's my short version of how I got into playing.
You know, it's interesting. You know, David and I spoke with Dave Swift, the bass player, who you might know from later with Jools Holland, probably the most recognized bass player in the UK. And my friend John Montagna, who you may know, who's played with a lot of repertory bands, and they're both devotees of Anthony Jackson, the great Anthony Jackson, the contrabass guitarist, who insists on calling it a bass guitar because it is a member of the guitar family. And Dave Swift, who was on with us with Ron Carter, who knows a few things about bass, said if you put an electric bass next to an upright bass and an electric guitar, what does it look more like? Well, it's obviously right. But you know, bass players, we have this prejudice, I guess, this chip on our shoulders that, wait a minute, it's a bass. And we came to the conclusion, or at least the hypothesis, that the reason why Leo Fender made it 4 strings was he wanted bass players to buy this so they wouldn't have to lug the doghouse around, because technically a bass player should have 6 strings because it is a bass guitar. And as we'll see in The Beatles Get Back, John Lennon is playing a 6-string bass. So
I have a bass 6 myself, and I like it a lot. It's an eccentric instrument, but it's really cool.
Right,
it's a lot of fun to play.
So there is no, you know, it's like I said again, it's us bass players with a chip on our shoulder. My wife, who played upright bass in high school, says, "Can you move your guitar?" I'm like, wait, that's not a guitar.
Ouch.
Ouch. Would you say that to Marcus Miller? No.
My feeling, though, is it is a bass guitar. I don't have a lot of times when people on the subway say, "Oh, you play guitar?" I say, "Well, it's a bass guitar." I mean, occasionally I say bass, but I think it's important to make the distinction. And I think, I think you're right about Leo Fender for one thing. I think that he was trying to appeal to the fact that bass players didn't want to lug around a huge, heavy, well, maybe not heavy, but bulky instrument. But clearly, you know, having made the Telecaster and the Stratocaster, it's pretty obvious to me that he thought, well, what's going to look good next to my Stratocaster and my Telecaster? Let me come up with something that, you know, visually works. And operates on the same principles. You know, you've got a tone knob and a volume knob and eventually a pickup selector and that kind of thing.
It's really extraordinary how Leo Fender kind of got it right the first time out. If you look at the 57 P bass, which you have a replica of in the back there, that split coil, and you look at my favorite instrument, the J bass, even though I prefer the tone of the P bass. He got it right. He got 1960 was the J bass. Turn your sets off there, folks. That's your instrument. You know,
it's extraordinary. It really. When I play a P bass, I just think, why did anybody continue designing beyond this? You know, and when I flip through a Sweetwater catalog or a Guitar Center catalog, and I see 5-string basses, and I see things with 3 pickups, and I see things that with all the knobs and switches, I just think, maybe it's for somebody. I guess it's for somebody, but it sure as hell ain't for me. You know, I think, like I said to you last night, one of the things that I love about the P bass is it's pretty idiot proof. You know, when I hit my first notes, if I think it's a little too bright, I roll one knob, and if my volume's a little too high or low, I roll the other knob, and I'm done. You know.
And it's beautiful. It's the genius is in its simplicity, and you'll meet
totally.
One of these days, you'll meet my radio partner, David Seagroves, who is a devotee of the 6-string bass. And David has quite a storied history. He was an Aztec 2-step. He was a sub for Will Lee and Neil Jason. So he knows a few things about P basses. And, you know, I actually gave him a P bass saying, you got to come home, David. You know, but what you know, we're going to talk about, I want to talk about your Mutt bass. And what really struck my heart was, growing up in the 70s, you know, it wasn't an instrument until you drilled a hole in it. That's what we did. And this is my beloved 76 P bass, which I bought in 1977. And of course, what did you do when you had a bass in 1977? You had to strip the paint off it, right? I mean,
sure.
You can't have Sunburst in 1977. You had to put a Leo Kwan bridge on it, of course. And then, of course, you know, Jocko, you got to have that bridge pickup. You know, and thankfully, Matt Brewster of 30th Street Guitars brought this bass back home to what it once was. But explain to me your P Mutt bass.
So the Mutt bass, I think I probably put it together about 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. And the story behind it is I work at a public high school. It's an arts high school, so we always have lots of instruments lying around. And years before I became a bass guitar player, I was teaching beginning guitar, as I still do. And I found tucked away in a storage room with a bunch of beat up old guitars and parts, there was a bass neck. It had no nut, it had no tuners. It was just the raw wood bass neck. And I grabbed it at the time because I liked the fact that you could see the end of the butt end of the neck where the truss rod adjustment was. And because whenever I try and explain to students what a truss rod is and what it does, I find that I'm using like hand gestures and doing like sign language, and it's not making any sense. And I thought, well, if I could hold up a neck and say, you see how it's got this? So I tucked it in the room where I store the guitars for the guitar class, and it was tucked in the corner, and it just lived there because I didn't play bass at the time, so I didn't have anything to do with it. But occasionally I'd take it out and show it to kids. So fast forward a few years to, I have been playing bass at this point for a few years. This was one of the first basses I got from 30th Street Guitars, you mentioned. Oh, okay. I had gotten a hollow body Gretsch single cutaway bass, which I liked a lot, but a couple of problems I had with it were, one, it had too many knobs and it had a toggle switch, and I was forever thinking, well, to adjust the sound, should I should I change the pickup or should I adjust the tone? And it just, when I'm on a gig and I just want more volume, I don't want to have to think about which pickup is on and all of that. So I liked the simplicity of the P bass. The other thing was that the Gretsch was worth like $1,400, and I just thought, I don't want to take this to the East Village on, in the middle of the night. So I traded and got this P bass, which I'd been playing for a while, and but then all of a sudden I started thinking about that bass neck again, tucked away in the room. So I checked it out and I realized it was a jazz bass neck, and I really like the thinness of jazz basses. So I thought, well, let me see what I could do with this. And I went on eBay. I found a fully loaded Squier Sunburst P bass body for, I think it was a little over $200, like $220, $240.
Yeah, Squiers aren't expensive in their full format anyway.
Yeah. Right. It probably would have been $100 more with the neck in and all of that. So I bought the body, and I also bought the tuners, and I'll put in a quick plug for my favorite luthier in the world, Evan Gluck, who works out of New York Guitar Repair on 140th, I think. Anyway, I took it up to him, and he was able to set me up with a nut for it. And I assembled it. And so I'll show you. I'm pretty sure that this is a Sadowski neck based on the curve of the headstock. And this is the Mutt bass. As you can see, pretty standard.
The classic Sunburst never goes out of
the standard
style.
Sunburst. And one of the things I liked about it too is that Keef from the Bee Breakers plays a Sunburst telly. So the two of us on stage, being the only guitarists, have quasi-matching guitars. He has a white pickguard, I have a tortoise, but other than that, we both have the Sunburst.
Come on, John, you're in show business. You're in show business, man.
I know. I should flip out the pickguard, but at least we do the matching dance steps. So there's that, but no, we don't actually. But the funny thing about it was when I finally got the whole bass assembled, and I had to mess around a lot with the angle of the neck and shim it and that kind of thing. I finally got it all put together, and then I started checking the intonation and adjusting the bridge saddles. And I got up to I was looking at the fret markers on the side of the neck, and this was marked as the 12th fret on the side markers. But you can see the front markers are actually at the 12th fret. So it was then that I noticed that that was why this neck had gotten tossed away all those years ago, because it was like a reject.
Yeah, it was a mistake. Yeah,
it was a mistake, but it plays great, and I was able to color in the white part of the fret markers on the side of the neck, so I don't notice them anymore. And I also put this blue kind of gaffer's tape on the side to provide nice big blue tactile fret markers, so that on a gig where it's there's not good light or whatever, I can kind of feel where the fret markers are. And so after I had assembled it, I was walking down the street one day and I thought, this bass that I've assembled is kind of a mutt, because I put it together from various parts. And then that got me to thinking about, I don't know if you're familiar with a piece of artwork from 1917 called Fountain.
I am
but
not.
there was a French artist named Marcel Duchamp, who in 1917 wanted to enter a piece of art into an art exhibition. And he decided to buy a urinal and flip it upside down, and then he signed it, R. Mutt, 1917. So, and it's a pretty famous work of art. So I found the signature that Duchamp had done online, and I copied it onto a piece of paper and then copied it onto the headstock, so there would be a signature on the headstock. So that's why it's the Mutt bass. And then as a final finishing, well, two final finishing touches, I had a little bit of space back there, so I decided Mr. Met should live on the back of the headstock.
Do you realize you and I are the only two bass players in New York who are Mets fans? Oh, no, wait a second. There's Mark Pollitt. So that's three of us. Maybe Jeff Gans. Okay, but okay.
Are the rest of them just sports agnostics, or are they all Yankee fans?
It's gonna be Yankee fans. Come on, it's it's
Oh.
2022. But if we get Steven Matz back, we'll be back in third place. Don't worry.
There you go. And then the real final finishing touch that I put on the bass was I took a page from Ernest Tubb, who used to use Jimmy Rogers' guitar that said "thanks" on the back, so that you could, broadcast that to the very back of the room. So
that's great. That's showbiz shtick. Well, who did that?
Showbiz.
I mentioned to you Fang from the Paul Revere and the Raiders. Mike something, and he had Fang on the back because he had big teeth, and that was his claim to fame. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't Pete Townsend do something like that? I think he might.
He does Arabic numerals like number 5 and number 4. Yes, I think to indicate different tunings and what he wants on what song, that kind of thing.
Right. And one of my last shows that I saw Miles in, he would actually hold up a piece of paper with the band members' names on it. So, with an arrow like Marcus Miller and things like that. So you come from a long
tradition. You give them
tradition.
Credit on stage, or to tell
he
them
would just hold up their, a placard with their name on it, as they were playing. So,
that's kind of cool. I've never heard of that.
You should try that. Anyway, and finally, how did you find yourself in the bass chair for the Emily Duff band, the Urban Chanteuse?
Sheer luck. I had been to see. I'm good friends with the members of Spanking Charlene.
Okay.
And I think it was I could be wrong on the year, but I'm pretty sure it was 2014. I went to see Spanking Charlene at the Delancey. And I had heard, all of my friends had been talking about this woman named Emily Duff. I kept hearing about her, and I thought, I'd love to find out what this is about, who Emily Duff is and what she does. And it turned out that Spanking Charlene and Emily Duff were on the same bill at the Delancey. So I thought, perfect, I'll get down there early. And I did, and I saw Emily and the band and was just floored. I mean, they played so great together. And the next day, I just wanted to reach out and say, fantastic job. That was literally the only reason I wrote. But I went on Facebook Messenger and I sent Emily a note saying, you don't know me, but we have a lot of friends in common. And I saw you and the band at Delancey last night and you were phenomenal. And she wrote back and said, thank you very much. That's great. I appreciate that. And by the way, I may be in need of a sub bass player in the next month or two. Would you be available? So totally fell into my lap. And, I often think like, well, what if I had just blown off having seen them and just, not contacted her? I never would have made that connection. But it turned out that Skip Ward, who is a phenomenal bass player.
Yes, Skip, sure.
Yeah. It turned out that Skip had to go out to the West Coast for a pit gig for, I think, like 4 or 6 months. And so at that point, Emily gave me, a list of songs as long as your arm and a bunch of recordings and said, learn all of these because when we play, it's a potpourri. I just pull whatever I want to out.
Which is great. Yeah, as it should be. Yeah.
It keeps you on your toes. It's an amazingly fun gig to play with Emily because, and I will say another guy I play with who does a similar kind of thing is Mark McKay with the Mark McKay band.
Sure.
And he had Keith Christopher in the band for a long time.
Yeah.
So, with both Keith and Skip, I feel like I'm holding down chairs that are just, we're occupied by some really heavy players. So I'm really, I feel pretty honored to be keeping the chairs warm and playing in those bands. But yeah, what was it? Oh, so Skip was out on the West Coast and I jumped in. Oh, so a lot of times Emily will throw things at us that, we weren't, I've played that song once or I've never played that song. There have been a few occasions where, I've leaned over during a gig and said, I don't know this song. And it's just, follow. And thankfully, Scott Aldrich, who plays guitar in the band, will, when need be, he'll lean over and say, D minor next or whatever.
You just follow the left hand. You got to follow the left hand and just tell them.
Well, a lot of times he's in front of me, so I can't see what he's doing.
No inversions and no capos. Come on.
Right. Keep it simple. Respect the bass player.
Which she does. And look, as long as you stay away from that 12th fret, you'll be fine. You'll be okay. Anyway, so